Imagine hearing a little girl screaming in the wilderness, then realizing nobody else heard it. Or looking out your bedroom window and seeing a crime scene where a body was hidden for 10 years. Tonight's stories move fast. Strangers in your yard, someone watching you from the shore, and a bleeding man who doesn't ask for help. He demands a ride. What would you do first? Run, record, or confront it? Story 1. This happened to me twice in the same summer, and to this day, it's still the scariest thing I've ever experienced. Where I live, there are a lot of stories about strange things out in the wilderness. People talk about creatures, spirits, and especially things like skinwalkers. I never really believed any of it. I mean, I had heard the stories growing up, and sure, they were creepy, but I always thought they were just that, stories. Still, they stuck in the back of my mind enough to make me uneasy whenever I was out in certain places at night. There's one spot near where I live that people talk about more than anywhere else. It's out near a bluff, kind of hidden and not easy to get to. There's a fence blocking most of the entrance, but there's one opening where you can drive through if you know where it is. That's the only way in that I know of. One night, around 1 in the morning, a few of us decided to go out there. Looking back, it was a stupid idea. It was late, we were tired, and we were going to a place that already had a reputation for being creepy. But at the time, it just felt like something to do. We piled into the car and made our way out there. As soon as we drove through that opening in the fence, I felt it. A sudden chill ran through my body. Or it wasn't just because it was cold outside. It felt deeper than that, like something was off. The air felt heavy, like we had just entered a place we weren't supposed to be. I didn't say anything at first. I just kept driving. One of my friends had been half asleep in the passenger seat. The rough ground and bumps woke him up as we drove further in. I heard him shift. Then suddenly he let out this sharp gasp. I looked over at him, and I'll never forget his face. He was completely pale. Not just a little shaken, but genuinely terrified. His eyes were wide, locked on something outside the window. He didn't take his eyes off it when he spoke. "We need to leave, now." There was something in his voice that made all of us go quiet. He wasn't joking. He wasn't trying to scare us. He sounded like he had just seen something he couldn't explain. We didn't argue. We turned around and got out of there as fast as we could. The whole drive back, he barely said anything. He just kept looking behind us, like he was expecting something to follow. Later, when we finally asked him what he saw, he hesitated before answering. He said he saw a little girl. She was running up the hill just ahead of us, but when we reached the same spot, there was no one there. At the time, I didn't fully believe him. He had just woken up, and it was late. I figured maybe he was confused, or his eyes were playing tricks on him in the dark. It didn't sit right, but I tried to brush it off. A few days later, I went back to that same place. This time, it was earlier in the evening, just as it was starting to get dark. I was with some of the same friends, but not the one who had seen the girl. That made me feel a little better, like maybe whatever had happened before was just a one-time thing. We parked and started walking down toward the bluff. The path wasn't easy. It sloped downhill and broke into small cuts and gaps in the ground, so you had to watch your step. Me and one of my friends ended up a bit ahead of the others as we made our way down. For a while, everything seemed normal. Then we heard it. At first, it was faint. A low sound, distant, almost like something moving or calling out. We both stopped at the same time, listening. The sound grew louder. It reminded me of an animal, maybe a dog or a coyote. Those aren't uncommon where I live. So at first I tried to tell myself that's all it was. But something about it didn't feel right. It didn't sound natural. There was something off in the way it echoed, and in the way it rose and fell. Without saying much, we both turned and started heading back up the hill. By the time we reached the top and rejoined the others, the sound had stopped. We turned around to look back at the spot where we had just been standing. And that's when we saw him. There was a man standing there, right in the same place we had been just moments before. He wasn't moving. He wasn't saying anything. He was just standing there looking straight at us. It didn't make sense. We hadn't seen anyone on the way down. There was nowhere he could have come from without us noticing. None of us said a word. We just stood there, staring. Then, almost at the same time, we all decided to leave. We didn't run, but we didn't waste any time either. We got back to the car and drove away, trying to act like it wasn't as strange as it felt. But even then, something about it stayed with me. You'd think that would have been enough to keep us away. It wasn't. Later that same night, we went back again. This time, there were more of us. Somehow, having more people made it feel less serious, like we could just treat it as a joke. We brought a lifted truck and started messing around, driving over rocks and rough terrain. I was helping the driver by leaning out the window, guiding him so he wouldn't hit anything. At first, everything was fine. We were laughing, talking, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling that had been building in the back of my mind since we got there. Then it happened. Out of nowhere, I heard it. A scream. Not just any scream, but a high-pitched, desperate, blood-chilling scream. It sounded like a little girl. It cut through the air so sharply that it felt like it went straight through me. My entire body tensed up, and I pulled myself back into the truck immediately. I started asking everyone if they heard it. No one did. They all looked at me like I was overreacting. Some of them laughed it off, saying I probably just scared myself. I tried to believe that. I told myself it was just in my head, maybe my imagination getting the better of me after everything that had already happened. But deep down, I knew what I heard. We stayed for a little longer, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I kept listening, waiting, hoping I wouldn't hear it again. Then, later that night, it happened again. This time, the driver heard it too. He froze for a second, then looked at me, and I could tell from his face that he had heard the exact same thing. That was enough. We didn't stick around after that. We left, and no one argued about it. Since then, I haven't gone back to that place. Even thinking about it now gives me that same uneasy feeling I had than the first time we drove through that fence. I still don't know what we saw or heard out there. I don't know if it was something real, something we just couldn't explain, or if it was all just our minds playing tricks on us in a place that already had a reputation for being strange. But I do know one thing. Whatever it was, it didn't feel normal. And I don't think I ever want to find out what it really was. Story 2. This happened around the beginning of September last year, and it's something I still think about from time to time because of how strange and unsettling it felt while it was happening. I live in a house at the very top of my street. It's a quiet area for the most part, but right across from my house, near the main road, there's a large farm. It's always just been there in the background of my daily life. I could see parts of the field from my bedroom window, but it was never something I paid much attention to. It was just farmland, nothing unusual about it. One day I was walking home from school like I always did. I entered my street from the bottom and started heading uphill toward my house. Everything seemed normal at first, but as I got closer, I noticed something that immediately felt off. Up ahead, in the field across from my house, there was a white tent set up. It stood out against everything else, and behind it, there were several police cars parked in a line. That alone was enough to make me slow down. As I kept walking, I noticed there were people gathered near the top of the street. A crowd had formed, and what made it even stranger was that they were standing right outside my house, looking across at the field. At that point, I knew something serious had happened. When I reached the group, I asked what was going on. The answer I got made my stomach drop. One of the farm workers had been harvesting crops in the field when they came across a body. Not just a body, but what was left of one. A skeleton. Hearing that was enough to send a chill through me. It didn't feel real. This wasn't something you expect to hear about happening right outside your home. It felt like something from a news story, not something that suddenly becomes part of your everyday life. I looked over toward the field again, trying to take it all in. The tent, the police, the people standing around quietly watching. And then it hit me. I could see all of this from my bedroom window. That thought made everything feel even more unsettling. The idea that something like that had been lying there, so close, for who knows how long, without anyone knowing. For the next few hours, more and more people showed up. Word spread quickly, and before long, the quiet street I was used to had turned into something completely different. Cars lined the road. People stood around talking in hushed voices, and everyone seemed to be focused on that one spot in the field. Not long after, the media arrived. Local newspapers, news crews, reporters. It turned into a full scene. Because my house was right across from where everything was happening, they even approached us for interviews. It felt strange being asked questions about something I had only just found out about myself. For the next 3 or 4 days, the police stayed there. They didn't just secure the area and leave. They worked constantly, examining the ground, digging in different spots, carefully searching for anything that might be connected. The white tent stayed up the entire time, and the presence of the police never really went away during those days. Every time I looked out my window, it was the same scene. Officers moving around, equipment being brought in and out, the field being slowly and carefully searched. It created this constant feeling of unease, like something heavy was hanging over the area. Eventually, more information started coming out. The remains were identified as belonging to a woman who had gone missing over 10 years earlier. She had been a prostitute, and at the time of her disappearance, there had been suspicions that she might have been one of several victims connected to a local serial killer. That's when things started to feel even darker. The idea that something like that had happened so close to where I lived, and that it might be connected to something bigger, something more violent, made it hard to stop thinking about. At first, the farmer who owned the land was arrested in connection with the case. That added another layer to everything. People started talking, speculating, trying to make sense of it all. But after some time, he was cleared of any wrongdoing. Still, the feeling didn't go away. Once the police finished their investigation and eventually left, things slowly started to return to normal. The cars were gone, the tent was taken down, and the field looked like it always had. But something had changed. People began leaving flowers at the fence where the body had been found. At first, it was just a few. Then more appeared. Soon, it became a small memorial. For about a month, people kept coming by to leave flowers, sometimes notes. sometimes small tokens in memory of the woman. Every time I saw it, it reminded me of what had happened. And that's when my thoughts started to take a darker turn. I had always heard that sometimes people who commit crimes like that return to the place where it happened. I don't know how true that is, but the idea stuck in my head. Every time I saw someone standing by the fence, placing flowers, or just quietly looking at the spot, I couldn't help but wonder, what if one of them wasn't there to pay respect? What if one of them was the person responsible? It sounds irrational, but at the time, it felt very real to me. I would watch from my window, seeing different people come and go, and I'd find myself studying them, wondering who they were, why they were there, what they were thinking. Most of them were probably just people from the area, paying their respects. But that small doubt stayed in my mind. And because it happened right outside my house, it wasn't something I could just forget. Even after the flowers stopped appearing and everything seemed to go back to normal, that feeling never fully disappeared. Sometimes I still look out at that field and think about it, about how something so serious, so disturbing, could be hidden in plain sight for so many years, and how, for a while, it had brought something dark and unsettling right to my doorstep. Story 3. My roommate and I were in a stressful situation at the time, trying to find a new place to live before our lease fully ran out. We had already stayed an extra month where we were, and it was getting to the point where we couldn't delay it any longer. After searching for a while, we finally came across a house that seemed like the perfect solution, even if it wasn't in the best condition. The place was a little run down, clearly not fully ready to be lived in, but it had everything we needed. It was a large house with huge rooms, a garden out back, and it was in a great location, close to both of our jobs. The owner had recently bought it and was in the middle of fixing it up. We managed to convince them to let us move in early, and while the renovations were still ongoing. Because of its condition, we were even able to negotiate a lower rent, which made it feel like a lucky find at the time. On the surface, it seemed like a great opportunity. But once we actually moved in, the reality of the place started to sink in. The appliances had all been replaced with brand new ones, which was probably the only part of the house that felt modern. Everything else was rough. The floors were stained and dirty, the wallpaper was old and peeling, and there was a layer of grime that made everything feel neglected. Old furniture was still scattered around, things that clearly needed to be thrown out but hadn't been dealt with yet. The whole place had this heavy, abandoned feeling, like it had been left untouched for too long. Living there, especially at the beginning, honestly felt like being inside a horror movie. The first night, my roommate didn't even stay. He went to his girlfriend's place, leaving me alone in the house. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I figured it would just be a quiet night, maybe a little uncomfortable because of the unfamiliar surroundings, but nothing more. I was wrong. From the moment it got dark, I felt uneasy. It wasn't anything I could point to, no specific sound or movement. It was just this constant feeling that I wasn't alone, like something was watching me. It followed me from room to room, a quiet but persistent awareness that I couldn't shake. As the night went on, it only got worse. I started getting chills, random shivers that ran through my body, even though the house itself wasn't particularly cold. I tried to distract myself, but it didn't help much. Eventually, I decided to go to bed, hoping that sleep would make it go away. But sleep didn't come easily. I kept drifting in and out of it, never fully resting. It was the middle of winter, but instead of feeling cold, I felt hot and uncomfortable. My skin was sweaty, itchy, like something was irritating it. At times, it even felt like small pinches, scattered across my body, enough to wake me up repeatedly throughout the night. Then the dreams started. They weren't random or confusing like most dreams. They were consistent, almost like a continuation every time I drifted back to sleep. In each one, there was an old woman. She was wearing a white nightgown, and she was just standing there, staring at me. At first, she was far away, barely visible, but every time I fell asleep again, she was closer. She didn't speak. She didn't move in any obvious way. She just stood there, watching me, getting closer each time the dream continued. There was something deeply unsettling about her presence, something that made it impossible to feel safe, even in sleep. As the night went on, the distance between us disappeared. She was right there, close enough that I could feel her presence. Then I woke up suddenly. It felt like someone had grabbed my ankles. I sat up immediately, my heart racing, looking around the room. But there was nothing there. Just the same empty, run-down space I had fallen asleep in. Morning couldn't come fast enough. The next day, things seemed more normal, at least on the surface. My roommate was back, and it felt a little less intense with someone else in the house. Not long after, our next-door neighbors came over to introduce themselves. They had lived in their home for about 60 years and knew a lot about the history of the area, including the house we had just moved into. As we talked, they began telling us about the previous owner. Apparently, the woman who had lived there before was a distant relative of the current owner. She had spent almost her entire life in that house. It had been in her family for around 100 years, passed down through generations. In the last 10 years of her life, she had lived there with a private nurse. But from what the neighbors told us, that situation hadn't been good. The nurse didn't take proper care of the house, which explained its condition. But more importantly, she didn't treat the woman well either. They didn't go into full detail, but it was clear that the woman's final years hadn't been peaceful. Eventually, she passed away in the house. As I listened to this, my mind immediately went back to the room I had slept in. There was still a large bed left there, old and out of place compared to everything else. I couldn't help but wonder if that was the room where she had died. After that conversation, it became harder to ignore what I had experienced that first night. Over the next month or so, strange things kept happening. Both my roommate and I would hear what sounded like the other person getting up early in the morning. We would hear movement, like someone in the kitchen making breakfast or moving things around. But when one of us actually got up to check, the other would still be asleep. It happened more than once, enough that we both noticed the pattern. There were also times when I would come home and find the back door unlocked, even though I was sure I had locked it before leaving. That door opened onto the patio, so it wasn't something I would forget casually. Small things would go missing, only to show up later in places we didn't remember putting them. At night, I would sometimes hear footsteps on the porch. Slow, steady pacing, like someone walking back and forth just outside. Every time I checked, there was no one there. None of these things were dramatic on their own, but together, they created a constant sense of unease. It felt like something was still there, something that hadn't left. Then, slowly, things started to change. The renovations picked up, and the house began to transform. The old wallpaper was removed, the floors were cleaned and replaced, the furniture was cleared out, day by day, and the place started to look less like something abandoned and more like a proper home. As the physical space improved, something else seemed to shift as well. The strange events stopped. No more footsteps, no more unexplained noises, no more misplaced objects. The house felt different, lighter somehow. The heavy, uncomfortable feeling that had been there at the beginning was gone. Now, the house is completely unrecognizable compared to how it was when we first moved in. It's clean, bright, and actually feels like a place you'd want to live in. Looking back, I still think about those first few weeks. I don't have a clear explanation for any of it. Maybe it was just the environment, the stress, or my imagination reacting to being alone in a strange place, but part of me wonders if it was something else. I like to think that whatever was there, whatever I felt watching me that first night, isn't something negative anymore. If anything, it feels like the energy of the house changed along with the renovations. Now, instead of feeling watched in a bad way, it almost feels like something is watching over us. Story 4. Let me explain the setting first, because it's important to understand why everything felt the way it did. My wife's parents live in a massive brick house that was built sometime in the early 1800s. It's not just big, it's the kind of place that feels like it has a long history behind it. The house has been fully restored, and on the surface, it's actually beautiful. High ceilings, old wood floors, solid construction, everything you'd expect from a place that's been standing for that long. But underneath all of that, there are parts of the house that feel very different. Over time, we've noticed a few strange things, and I've managed to explain some of them logically. Old houses make noise, animals get inside walls, that kind of thing. But there are other details about the house that are harder to ignore. For example, there are hidden corridors behind the walls. These aren't just small crawl spaces either. They're actual passageways that run through large parts of the house. There are also 2 separate staircases that were clearly built for servants or slaves, both tucked away and hidden from the main areas. One of them leads down near the kitchen, and the other comes out near the master bedroom. Then there's the basement. In the basement, there's a small room that stands out from everything else. The door to this room has a handle only on the outside, not the inside. That alone is enough to make you uncomfortable. Inside that room is what used to be the coal storage area, back when the house relied on coal for heat. What makes it worse is what's still inside. There are old metal hooks fixed into the walls. From what we were told, they were used to chain people in place, and even to hang beds. Just being in that room gives you a heavy, uneasy feeling that's hard to explain. And then, of course, there's the attic. The attic is strange in a different way. It's not obviously disturbing like the basement, but it feels off. It's the kind of place that seems bigger than it should be, with sections that don't quite make sense. It reminds me of one of those hidden rooms you hear about, like it's not always easy to find or fully understand. Now, those are just the details of the house itself. The things that have actually happened there are what make it stick with me. One of the first things I noticed was how the animals reacted. Every animal in that house avoids certain areas completely. The cat won't go near the hidden corridors or the basement door. It's not just hesitation either. It's like they actively refuse to be near those places. We brought our dog over one weekend, and I experienced it myself. I tried to take him outside using the staircase near the kitchen, the one hidden behind the wall. The moment he saw the entrance to that staircase, he completely lost it. He panicked in a way I had never seen before. He turned around instantly and tried to run the other way, while scrambling on the wooden floors so hard that his feet were slipping out from under him. He looked absolutely terrified, like he was trying to get away from something he didn't understand. He reacted the same way near the other hidden staircase and even near the basement door. That alone was enough to make me uneasy. Another strange thing happened when my in-laws first moved into the house. They had 2 kittens at the time. For about a year, almost every day, they would come home and find the kittens locked inside clay pots in the pantry under the stairs. The pots would have lids on them, and the pantry itself would be closed. At first, they couldn't explain it. It didn't make sense how the kittens were getting in there, let alone how the lids were ending up on top. Eventually, they started to think it might be something in the attic, where there had been noises, movement, things that suggested animals were getting in somehow. So I set up a live trap. It turned out there were raccoons up there. Once we caught and removed them, that particular problem stopped. That was one of the few times where there was a clear explanation, and it made everyone feel a little better. But not everything has been that easy to explain. The one thing that really stayed with me happened more recently. When my mother-in-law first moved into the house, she found a set of real silver candlestick holders. They were old and valuable, and over time, she liked them so much that she bought several replicas to place around the house. The replicas looked almost identical to the originals. One day, all of the real silver ones disappeared. At the same time, her mother's wedding ring set also went missing, and it wasn't like a normal robbery. None of the expensive electronics were touched. Only those specific items were gone. Naturally, the first thought was that someone in the family might have taken them, or that someone had gotten into the house somehow. A few days later, the furnace in the basement stopped working. So I went down there with her dad to take a look and try to fix it. We were walking through the basement when we passed by the coal room, the same one with the outside-only handle and the hooks on the walls. As we walked by, we noticed something faint in the back of the room. A small glimmer of light. It was just enough to catch our attention. We both stopped and looked at each other, then walked into the room to see what it was. The air in there felt heavy, like it always does. But we ignored it and focused on the back corner where the light was coming from. When we got closer, we saw exactly what it was. The missing silver candlestick holders. And right next to them, the wedding ring set. Just sitting there, as if they had been placed carefully in that exact spot. Both of us immediately felt this deep sense of unease. It wasn't panic, but it was enough to make us uncomfortable being in that room any longer than we had to be. We grabbed the items and went straight back upstairs. When we showed them to my mother-in-law, she didn't react the way I expected. She didn't panic or question it too much. Instead, she just calmly took them and put them back where they originally belonged. Then she said something out loud, almost like she was speaking to someone we couldn't see. She said that if the items were taken again, they could stay down there. But her mother's wedding ring was not something they could keep. After that, she didn't talk about it again. At one point, I went back down to the coal room to see if I could find any kind of explanation. I thought maybe it could still be animals, maybe raccoons again, or something else that had dragged the items down there. But when I checked, I didn't find anything. No footprints, no signs of disturbance, nothing that would explain how those items got there. The only marks I saw were faint trails in the coal dust that looked like they were made by a snake. And that didn't explain anything. Since then, I haven't really come up with a solid explanation for what happened in that house. Some things I can explain, but some things just don't make sense. Story 5. When I was around 5 or 6 years old, I got sick with what I remember as a simple cold. It was the weekend, and my mom was working part-time at a hospital back then, so she wasn't home. That left just me, my dad, and my brother in the house. I don't remember feeling especially terrible at first, just tired and a little off. But at some point during the day, my dad decided I should go lie down and try to sleep it off. Looking back now, I don't clearly remember having a fever at that moment. But over the years, I've tried to make sense of what happened, and the only explanation that seems even slightly reasonable is that I must have had one. A high fever. Maybe worse than I realized at the time, because what I experienced that day didn't feel like a normal dream or anything I had ever encountered before or since. I remember lying in my bed in the middle of the day, which already felt unusual. Sunlight was coming through the windows, and everything had that quiet, still feeling that houses get when most people are out or busy. I was trying hard to fall asleep, even though I wasn't really tired in the way you need to be to drift off easily. I kept my eyes shut, almost forcing them closed, hoping that if I stayed still long enough, sleep would just come. As I lay there, I started to notice a light breeze brushing against my face. It wasn't strong or alarming. It was actually pretty normal, considering it was summer and my windows were open. At first, I didn't think anything of it. It was the kind of small detail your body notices without your mind paying much attention. But something about it made me open my eyes. And the moment I did, everything changed. Floating just above my bed were figures, not full bodies, not people standing there, but shapes that looked like heads, shoulders, and necks. They were hovering in the air, completely silent at first, almost as if they had always been there and I had only just noticed them. They were wearing what looked like dark hoods, the kind that cast shadows over their faces. But I could still see enough to know that something about them wasn't right. Their skin looked red and raw, almost burned, like exposed flesh. It didn't look human in a normal way. It looked damaged, unnatural, and wrong. And then there were their expressions. Even now, it's hard to describe them properly, but I remember their smiles clearly. Dark, stretched, and unsettling in a way that didn't feel like any kind of happiness. And it felt like they were enjoying something, but not in a way that made any sense to me as a child. For a moment, I just stared at them, frozen. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It didn't feel like a dream, because I was aware of everything around me, the room, the light, the feeling of the air. I was awake, completely awake. Then they started to move. Slowly at first, they began circling above me, drifting through the air in a way that didn't follow any kind of normal motion. It wasn't like walking or flying. It was more like they were just gliding, effortlessly, as if gravity didn't apply to them at all. And then they started laughing. The sound of it is something that has stayed with me all these years. It wasn't loud at first, but it was clear. A kind of low, unsettling laughter that didn't feel human. As they moved around me, the sound grew stronger, filling the space around my bed, pressing in from all sides. That's when the fear really hit me. I remember throwing my hands up over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut as tightly as I could. I didn't want to see them anymore. I didn't want to hear them. But the laughter didn't stop. If anything, it felt like it got louder, closer, more intense the more I tried to block it out. I started crying, panicking in a way I had never experienced before. It wasn't just fear, it was overwhelming, like my entire body was reacting at once and I couldn't control any of it. Finally, I screamed for my dad. I don't know how long it took, but it felt like forever. The laughter, the movement, the feeling of being surrounded. It all kept going until suddenly my dad rushed into the room. The moment he was there, everything stopped. The figures were gone, completely gone, as if they had never been there at all. He came over to me quickly, holding me and trying to calm me down. I remember him telling me it was just a dream, that I must have been having a nightmare. But I knew, even at that age, that I hadn't been asleep. I had been lying there, trying to fall asleep. But I hadn't crossed that line into dreaming. I was awake when I saw them. That's what made it so much harder to understand. After that moment, my memory becomes strange and unclear. There's a gap there that I can't fully fill in, no matter how hard I try. It's like pieces of time are missing, or maybe just blurred together in a way that doesn't make sense anymore. But there is one more thing I remember. It's not a full scene, more like flashes, but they're strong enough to stay with me. I remember being in the back seat of my dad's car, not sitting normally, but curled down in that lower space between the seats. My knees were pulled tight against my chest, and my hands were clamped over my ears again, just like they had been in my bed. I was terrified. My mom was there this time, sitting in the back seat with me. I remember her legs on either side of me, almost like she was trying to shield me or hold me in place. There was a sense of urgency, like something serious was happening, even if I didn't fully understand it. And I remember what I was saying. I was screaming that they were back. Over and over again, I was saying that they had come back, that they wouldn't leave me alone, that they wanted me dead. Those words feel strange now, especially coming from someone so young, Ulrich, but I remember the feeling behind them clearly. It wasn't just fear, it was absolute certainty in that moment. After that, everything fades out again. I don't remember arriving at the hospital, but I know that's where we were going. I can only assume that whatever was happening to me, whether it was a high fever, some kind of intense hallucination, or something else entirely, was serious enough that my parents felt I needed immediate help. As I got older, I tried to make sense of it all in a more rational way. The explanation that fits best is that I was very sick and experiencing fever-induced hallucinations. That's something that can happen, especially in children. It would explain the vividness, the fear, and the way everything felt so real. But even with that explanation, there's something about the experience that doesn't fully settle, because it didn't just end there. To this day, I still have a strange reaction to a certain kind of silence. It's hard to explain properly, but it's not just quiet in the normal sense. It's a deeper kind of silence, the kind where everything feels muted, almost like the world has been turned down too far. When it happens, I feel a sudden, intense sense of panic. My chest tightens, my thoughts race, and I get this overwhelming feeling that something is wrong, even if there's nothing actually there. It's not logical, and I know that. But the feeling is immediate and powerful. And the reason it affects me like that is because that exact kind of silence is what I remember from that day. Right before I saw those figures, right before everything started, there was that same heavy, unnatural quiet. Or it's something I've never been able to fully shake. Even now, years later, it lingers in a way that I can't completely explain, tied to a memory that still doesn't feel entirely like a dream. Story 6. When I think back to my college years, there are a lot of memories that come to mind, most of them normal and even fun in their own way. Late nights, loud rooms, random conversations, and the kind of freedom that comes with living away from home for the first time. But there's one experience that has always stayed with me, not because of anything that actually happened, but because of how deeply unsettling it felt at the time. I lived in a dorm with a few roommates, and like most college students, we weren't exactly quiet. Our room was usually full of noise, whether it was music playing, people talking over each other, or just us joking around. It was the kind of place where people would come and go freely, and we didn't think much about it. Somewhere above our floor, there was this guy who lived in the same building. I didn't know much about him at first. He wasn't part of our circle, and I had never really seen him around in a social setting. But that changed one day in a way I didn't expect. We were being especially loud that day, just messing around like we usually did, when this guy suddenly appeared at our door. Before we could even properly react, he walked right into our room like it was completely normal. It caught all of us off guard. At first, it was just awkward. He didn't introduce himself in any clear way, and his behavior felt a little off, like he didn't fully understand social boundaries. But at the same time, he didn't seem aggressive or threatening. If anything, he came across as someone who was just a bit strange, but maybe harmless. So we didn't make a big deal out of it. We talked to him for a while, tried to be polite, and eventually he left. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. After that day, he started showing up more often. At first, it was occasional. Then it became frequent. He began trying to spend time with us, especially with me and a couple of my friends. Around that time, we had just started experimenting with smoking, and it was something we would do together in a relaxed, social way. For some reason, he seemed very interested in joining us during those moments. The first couple of times, we didn't think too much about it, but the more time we spent around him, the more uncomfortable I started to feel. There was something about him that didn't sit right with me. Something I couldn't fully explain at the time. When he was sober, he was already hard to read. His reactions didn't always match the situation, and he had this way of staring that made you feel like he was thinking something he wasn't saying. But when he got high, it became even more noticeable. He would act in ways that felt unpredictable. Sometimes he would laugh for no clear reason. Other times, he would go quiet and just watch people. It made it hard to relax. After a few of those interactions, I realized I didn't want to be around him anymore, especially not in that kind of setting. The problem was, I didn't know how to tell him that. None of us were good with confrontation, and instead of addressing it directly, we took the easier route. We started avoiding him. At first, and it was small things. Not answering messages right away, making excuses, leaving when he showed up. But he was persistent. He kept coming around, acting like nothing had changed, trying to fit himself into our group. Eventually, our avoidance became obvious. We would pretend we weren't in the room when he knocked, or we would quickly change plans if we knew he might show up. It wasn't subtle at all, and it didn't take long for him to realize what was happening. When he did, his behavior changed. He didn't confront all of us. Instead, he seemed to focus his anger entirely on me. I don't know why. Maybe he saw me as the one leading the distance, or maybe something about me just triggered that reaction in him. Whatever the reason, it became clear that he had a problem with me specifically. He didn't say much directly at first, but the way he looked at me changed. There was tension there. Something unspoken, but very real. Then came the moment that made everything feel different. One day I walked into my room and found him already there, sitting with my roommate and a couple of other friends. The second I saw him, I felt that same uneasiness come back, stronger than before. He was smiling, but it wasn't a normal smile. It felt forced, or maybe just out of place, like it didn't match the conversation or the mood in the room. I stayed, even though I didn't want to, and tried to act normal. At first, the conversation seemed harmless. He started talking about his life, about things he had gone through. He said he had a difficult past, that people had treated him badly, and that he had often been left out or pushed away. It sounded like he was opening up and sharing something personal. But then, without any warning, the tone shifted completely. He said something that I still remember word for word. He said that he was a sadist. Then, in the same calm, casual voice, he added that if he ever killed someone, he would torture them first. There was no hesitation, no sign that he was joking. The room went completely silent. I remember looking around at everyone else, and we all had the same reaction. No one said anything, but our expressions made it clear that we were all thinking the same thing. It was one of those moments where you don't need words to understand how serious something feels. It wasn't just what he said. It was how he said it. Like it was a normal thought, something he had already accepted about himself. After that, the energy in the room changed completely. We didn't challenge him. We didn't laugh it off. We just waited for the conversation to end and for him to leave. And when he finally did, we immediately started talking about it. There was no question in our minds that it was disturbing. We decided to report it to the RA, hoping that someone in authority would take it seriously and do something about it. We explained everything, what he had said, how he had been acting, how uncomfortable it made us feel. But nothing came from it. No action was taken, no warnings, nothing that made us feel safer. That was probably the worst part. Around the same time, the weather had gotten really hot, and our room didn't have good ventilation. The only way to get some air was to leave the door open at night so it could flow through from the window. My roommates insisted on keeping it open. Under normal circumstances, it wouldn't have been a big deal. But after everything that had happened, it felt like we were leaving ourselves exposed. Anyone could walk in, just like he had before. Those nights were some of the most uncomfortable I've had. Every sound in the hallway made me alert. Footsteps, doors opening and closing, voices in the distance. I would lie there, trying to sleep. But my mind kept going back to what he had said. I kept thinking about how easily he had entered our space before, how unpredictable he felt, and how nothing had been done after we reported it. I didn't sleep much during that time. It felt like we were just waiting for something to happen, even though nothing ever did. Then, after a few months, he was just gone. No one knew exactly what happened. He stopped showing up. He stopped being seen around the dorm, and eventually people stopped talking about him. It was like he had disappeared without any explanation. Life went back to normal after that, at least on the surface. But that experience stayed with me. Looking back, nothing physical ever happened. He never actually acted on anything he said. But the feeling he created, the tension, the uncertainty, that sense of not knowing what someone is capable of, that's what made it so unsettling. Sometimes, it's not actions that stay with you. It's the moments where you realize that someone might not think the same way as everyone else. And that realization is enough to change how safe you feel around them. Story 7. I don't remember the exact year this happened, but I know I was somewhere between 14 and 17, and it was during the time I was living in a house where my bedroom was at the very end of a long hallway. My window faced the street, and at night, it gave me a clear view of the quiet road outside. During the day, everything felt normal, even peaceful sometimes. But at night, the feeling in that room would change completely. Ever since we had moved into that house, I had been dealing with night terrors and this constant sense of unease that I couldn't explain. It wasn't always intense, but it was always there in the background. When the lights were off and everything went quiet, that feeling would grow stronger. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling or toward the window, feeling like something wasn't right, even though I had no real reason to think that. The only thing that ever made me feel better during those nights was my cat. She was always around, either inside with me or somewhere outside. She had this routine where she would come back at night and scratch at my window screen until I let her in. It became something I depended on more than I realized at the time. She always seemed to show up right when I needed her the most, almost like she could sense when I was starting to feel scared. Most nights, I didn't even have to think about it. I would hear that scratching sound, get up, and let her in. Then she'd jump onto my bed, curl up near me, and just her presence alone would calm me down. It made the room feel normal again. But one night, things didn't go the way they usually did. She hadn't come back yet. It wasn't even that late. I remember it being around 10 or 11 at night, probably on a weekend because my parents were still awake in another part of the house. Normally, that would have been enough to make me feel safe, knowing they were nearby. But for some reason, that night, I felt more uneasy than usual. I kept waiting to hear her at the window, but it stayed quiet. The longer I waited, the more restless I became. I don't know why I felt so impatient that night. Maybe it was because the house felt heavier than usual, or maybe I just needed that comfort more than normal. Eventually, instead of waiting, I decided to go outside and look for her. It seemed like a simple enough idea at the time. I walked out through the front door and stepped into the yard. The air outside felt still, almost too quiet. There were no cars passing by, no people around, just that deep nighttime silence that makes every small sound stand out. I started calling for her, saying, "Here, kitty, kitty," over and over, walking slowly around the front yard and looking into the darker corners where she sometimes hid. I didn't go far, just stayed close to the house. After a minute or two of not seeing her, I figured she'd come back on her own like she always did. So I gave up and turned to head back inside. I was maybe 15 feet away from the front door when it happened. I turned around, and suddenly there was a man standing right behind me. He was so close that I could have reached out and touched him. For a moment, everything just stopped. We stood there, facing each other, barely a couple of feet apart. I don't even remember what he looked like in detail, just the shock of seeing someone there when I was completely sure I had been alone. There had been no sound, no footsteps, nothing to warn me that anyone was nearby. It didn't make sense. My mind couldn't process it properly. I didn't know what to say, what to do, or how to react. I just remember this intense rush of fear hitting me all at once. But at the same time, I didn't scream or run. Instead, I did something that even now feels strange to think about. I turned around again and walked back to the house as calmly as I could. I didn't look back. I didn't say anything. I just focused on getting to the door, opening it, and going inside. Somehow, acting calm felt safer than showing fear. The moment I was inside, everything hit me. My heart was racing, and my hands felt cold. I knew something was very wrong about what had just happened, but I still couldn't fully process it. For some reason, I didn't tell my parents right away, even though they were just in another part of the house. Looking back, I don't understand why. Maybe I was in shock, or maybe I didn't want to believe what I had just seen. I stayed quiet for what felt like a long time, though it was probably only a few minutes. Eventually, I told my dad. As soon as he heard, his reaction was immediate. He went straight outside, ready to confront whoever had been there. I remember hearing him moving around, checking the yard, looking for any sign of the man. But there was nothing. No one was there anymore. It was like he had just disappeared. After that, things went back to normal on the surface. But the memory stayed with me. At the time, I tried to come up with explanations to make it feel less frightening. I told myself it might have been some random person passing through, maybe someone drunk or lost. But the more I thought about it over the years, the less sense that explanation made. We lived in a very small town, the kind where everyone knows each other. My family, especially my mother and grandmother, were well known in the community. It wasn't the kind of place where strangers could just wander into someone's yard without being noticed. I had never seen that man before that night, and in all the years that followed, more than 20, I never saw him again. There were no unfamiliar cars parked near our house that night, no signs that anyone had come to visit. And even if someone had, they wouldn't have been standing that close to me in our yard, just a few feet from the door, without saying anything. That's the part that still bothers me the most. He wasn't near the edge of the yard or by the sidewalk. He was right behind me, close enough to reach out and touch. And he hadn't made a single sound. Sometimes I think about how easily things could have gone differently. If I hadn't turned around at that exact moment, I don't know what might have happened. That thought is what stays with me, even now. It's the kind of memory that settles in the back of your mind and never fully leaves. Even after all these years, just thinking about it makes my stomach tighten. Story 8. This happened about 3.5 years ago, and even now, when I think back on it, it still gives me that same uneasy feeling. It was summer break, and like a lot of summer nights, I was up late doing nothing. Around 1 or 2 in the morning, I was chatting online with a friend. We were both bored, just going back and forth, trying to find something to do. After a while, I suggested something a little random. I asked him if he wanted to go out to the lake and take a swim. It sounded like a good idea at the time. The weather had been really hot that day, and the lake was usually warm enough at night to be comfortable. It wasn't something we did often that late, but that was kind of the appeal. It felt spontaneous and different. He agreed pretty quickly. The lake wasn't too far from my house, but it wasn't exactly close either. It was about a 20-minute walk through a forest. During the day, the path was easy enough to follow. But at night, it was a completely different experience. We met up and started walking. As soon as we got into the forest, the darkness really hit us. There wasn't much moonlight that night, so most of the path was barely visible. The trees blocked out what little light there was, and everything around us felt heavier and quieter than usual. Even though we were talking at first, we both naturally got quieter the deeper we went. Every sound stood out more. Leaves shifting, branches moving, small noises that you wouldn't even notice during the day suddenly felt louder and more noticeable. But we kept going, sticking to the path until we finally reached the lake. When we got there, it felt almost completely still. The water was dark, blending into everything around it. You couldn't really see far out, just the faint outline of the surface. It felt different from how it looked during the day, like it was a completely separate place. We didn't think too much about it, though. We changed into our swim shorts and got ready to go in. Before we stepped into the water, we made a simple plan. Since it was so dark, we wanted to make sure we could find our way back to where we left our clothes. So we placed a flashlight on the ground and pointed it toward the water. That way, no matter how far we swam out, we would have a clear point of reference to guide us back. With that sorted, we got into the water. At first, it felt normal. The water was warm enough, and once we got used to the darkness, it didn't feel too bad. We started swimming out further, just like we had planned. We went out about 50 meters or so. That's when things started to feel different for me. I've always had a bit of a fear of deep water. It's something I can usually manage, and especially during the day when I can see around me. But out there, in the middle of the lake, in complete darkness, it felt much stronger. I couldn't see what was below me. I couldn't see very far ahead either. It was just darkness in every direction, with the faint glow of the flashlight behind us. At some point, we both stopped and turned around to look back at the light. And that's when it happened. The flashlight went off, just like that. Then it turned back on, then off again, then on. It didn't look like a malfunction. It looked like something had passed in front of it, blocking the light for a moment, then moving away. The timing felt too deliberate. We both froze in the water. My friend turned to me and asked if I saw it. I told him I did. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything after that. We just stayed there, floating in place, staring at that small light in the distance. Every thought started running through my head at once. We were in the middle of the woods. It was around 3 a.m. There shouldn't have been anyone else out there. We stayed where we were for a while, just watching. About 5 minutes passed, maybe a little more. Nothing else happened. The light stayed steady, and the area around it looked completely still again. Eventually, we convinced ourselves that maybe it was nothing. Maybe the flashlight flickered, or maybe something small passed in front of it. We didn't want to stay out there any longer than we had to, so we decided to head back. We swam back as quickly as we could without completely panicking. When we reached the shore, we got out of the water and immediately started getting dressed. Neither of us said much. There was this shared understanding that we just wanted to leave. Right as we were about to go, I picked up the flashlight. That's when I noticed something lying on the ground next to it. A shoe. I stared at it for a second, trying to process what I was seeing. It wasn't ours, and I was absolutely sure it hadn't been there when we arrived. We had set the flashlight down ourselves. There was nothing around it at the time. We would have noticed something like that. But now, right next to it, there was a single shoe. That was the moment everything clicked in the worst possible way. Someone else had been there, not just nearby, but close enough to walk right up to where we left our things. Close enough to pass in front of the flashlight, maybe even watching us while we were out in the water. Neither of us said anything. We didn't try to figure it out. We didn't look around. We didn't hesitate. We just left. We grabbed our stuff and got out of there as fast as we could. The walk back through the forest felt completely different from the way in. Every sound felt sharper. Every shadow felt like it could be hiding something. Even when we made it out, the feeling didn't go away right away. To this day, we still talk about it sometimes. And every time we do, it gives us the same chills. Halfway in, be honest. Which fear hits harder for you, the paranormal or real humans acting wrong? And if you had to pick one moment that felt the most something is not normal, which story is it so far, and what detail convinced you? Comment your answer. Let's compare instincts. Story 9. A few summers ago, when I was around 15, I had one of the scariest nights of my life. It started out like any other night with my close group of friends. We'd been hanging out on the porch of my friend's apartment, smoking and drinking all day, as reckless teenagers sometimes do. I know, 15 years old. not exactly the smartest choice. But I wasn't thinking about the consequences at the time. By the time night rolled around, I was starting to feel a little off, maybe a bit dizzy from everything we'd been doing. I decided it was time to call it quits and go to sleep. By that point, I had been practically living at my friend's apartment all summer, so it felt completely normal to crash on one of the couches in her bedroom. Her apartment was on the first floor, and her bedroom window didn't have a screen or anything to stop people from opening it. We often came and went as we pleased through it, especially at night, which was something I barely thought about. That night, a few of my friends woke me up briefly to let me know that they were sneaking out through the window to go do something. They reminded me to make sure to close it behind them. I made sure I did. But a few minutes later, one of them came back, opening the window from the outside because she'd forgotten something, and apparently she didn't close it properly. By that time, I had already fallen back asleep, and I didn't notice. I should probably explain the setup of the bedroom, because it makes what happened next even scarier. The couch I was sleeping on was right across the middle of the room, about 2 or 3 feet away from the window. My head was on the side closest to the window, which meant I was directly in line with it. I was fully stretched out, half asleep, completely unaware of what was about to happen. Hours passed, and at some point in the night, I started to hear a rustling sound outside the window. At first, I assumed it was just my friends coming back, maybe fumbling around outside, nothing to worry about. The sound didn't really concern me until it moved inside, right next to where my head was resting. This wasn't a loud crash or a banging sound. It was deliberate, soft movements on the floor. My brain tried to rationalize it, telling me maybe it was just the wind or something falling. But my instincts screamed otherwise. Half awake, I lifted my head slowly and murmured my friend's name, glancing at the window. I expected to see her standing there, maybe reaching through to grab something. But what I saw instead froze me to my core. It wasn't her. It was a stranger. He had a dark beanie pulled low over his eyebrows, a scarf covering the bottom half of his face, and his arms were reaching through the window. He was halfway inside, crouched just above me, his eyes dark, deep, and unreadable, locked onto mine. For a brief, terrifying second, we just stared at each other. I could tell he hadn't expected anyone to be on the couch, and I'm sure he was just as startled as I was. Then he moved slightly, and I realized he was reaching toward his belt. My heart stopped. I had terrible eyesight without my glasses, and in the panic of the moment, it looked like he was pulling a gun. I screamed, a high, piercing sound, and tried to throw myself off the couch and hide. My body refused to obey properly, like my brain and limbs had stopped communicating, and I froze mid-motion. He hesitated, then started spraying something in my face. My screams intensified, and I flailed blindly, trying to get away. The pain hit instantly. It burned, my eyes watering so badly that I thought I was going blind. I realized later it was mace, but at the time, all I could feel was the searing heat and the terror. After what felt like an eternity, he finally backed out of the window and disappeared into the night. I was left sitting on the couch, shaking and gasping for breath, eyes streaming, struggling to understand what had just happened. I called my friend, bawling, begging her to come home because I had no idea what to do. And her mother was out of town. The burning in my eyes was so intense that I thought I might permanently damage my vision. I could barely focus on anything around me. When my friends finally arrived, we soaked a washcloth in milk and pressed it against my eyes to ease the sting. The sensation was still overwhelming, but it allowed me to breathe and calm down a little. The police were called, and they came to investigate. They took pictures of my face, the floor, the window, everything they could, trying to figure out what had happened. But after their investigation, they told us that there had been no man at the window. According to them, I had experienced a delusional dream or hallucination. My friends believed me. They had been there and saw my panic. But the police basically dismissed the whole incident as nonsense and left. Even after the investigation, the fear didn't leave me. For weeks, I couldn't sleep properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see the dark, unreadable eyes of the stranger staring at me, the shadow of his beanie and the scarf over his face. Every noise at night, even the slightest rustle, sent me into a panic. I would lie awake for hours, convinced someone was outside, watching me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Even now, years later, I still struggle with sleeping near windows. Open or closed, it doesn't matter. I can't shake the memory of those dark eyes, the shadowy face, and the burning sting of the mace. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and instinctively check the window, even though I know there's nothing there. It's a fear that has stayed with me, a constant reminder that one night of being alone and unprotected can leave a mark that doesn't fade with time. That night taught me just how vulnerable you can feel when the world around you seems perfectly normal and safe. And then something completely unexpected shatters that illusion. The apartment, my friends. The summer day. It all seemed harmless and ordinary. But in the span of a few terrifying minutes, everything changed. Even though I know logically it was probably a hallucination, the fear was real. The pain was real. And the panic was more intense than anything I had experienced before or since. I've learned to be careful now, to lock windows, to never underestimate the small details of my surroundings, and to take my own instincts seriously. But I can't undo the fear that night planted in me. Every time I see a window open at night, every time I hear an unusual sound nearby, a part of me remembers those dark eyes staring just inches from mine, the hot sting of the mace in my face, and the helplessness of being completely alone and unaware. That memory has become a part of me, a shadow that I carry quietly, a reminder that sometimes the scariest things aren't outside in the dark. They're the things that your mind insists are real, even when everyone else tells you they aren't. Story 10. It was a typical weekend, and my friends Mike, Haley, Lois, and I were just hanging out like we usually did. We had no plans beyond chilling, so we ended up at the local 7-Eleven, grabbing some pretzels and soda, sitting on the little benches outside, laughing and joking about nothing in particular. The kind of day where nothing extraordinary seems likely to happen. The sun had set, and the air was cool and quiet, all perfect for a low-key night. While we were mid-conversation, my phone buzzed. I pulled it out, expecting one of the usual messages, but it was from a girl named Melanie. I still have the text, and I swear I'm not exaggerating. It said exactly, "So me and Jill found this creepy abandoned house and we want to go in." My first thought was probably some mix of curiosity and skepticism. A creepy abandoned house? Classic teenage adventure material. A few minutes of convincing Haley and Lois later, we agreed to meet Melanie and Jill and see what this house was all about. After a short walk through the neighborhood, it was already around 11 p.m. when we reached the house. The first thing we noticed was that it was exactly what you'd imagine when someone says, abandoned house. Old, weathered wood, cracked paint peeling off the walls, and on windows boarded up. Clearly meant to keep people like us out. The backyard gate was open, so we slipped inside without having to climb anything. And it revealed a small rectangular yard with an empty pool in the center covered with a tarp. We didn't waste time. We found a padlock on the back door, broke it, and stepped inside. At first, the house was just run down in a normal way. Dusty floors, cobwebs in the corners, and that faint, musty smell that old abandoned houses always have. Nothing immediately threatening. It was almost boring, really, until we split up to explore like kids do when they find somewhere like this. Everyone was wandering through different rooms, whispering to themselves or to each other, poking around for whatever oddities might be hidden in the house. I ended up with Jill, us walking quietly upstairs while the rest of the group was scattered throughout the house. We went to the first door on the right. I remembered Jill was acting nervous even before we entered, fidgeting, whispering that maybe we shouldn't go in. I opened the door anyway, and I froze. The room was strange, more unsettling than any of the rest of the house. In the middle of it was a single chair, completely surrounded by mirrors. The floor around it was littered with broken glass, and in some places, the shards were stained with what looked like blood. For some reason, seeing it seemed to calm Jill down instead of scaring her further. I didn't question it. We moved on, and she suddenly insisted we check out the attic. I hesitated, knowing attics can be tight and creepy, but curiosity won out. I pulled the string to lower the folding staircase, while then we climbed up into the narrow, confined space. It was so tight we practically had to crawl. Books and other debris lay scattered around, left behind by whoever had lived there before, or maybe by someone who had been exploring before us. It didn't matter. It all had an odd, forgotten energy about it. Then we heard it, a low, guttural growl, the kind of sound that makes the hair on your arms stand up and the blood run cold. My stomach dropped, and I glanced around, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. And then I saw it. A girl, or something resembling a girl, was lying there. Gray-skinned, black hair falling over her face. Her eyes glinted with something dark and angry, and she was growling, low and terrifying. I don't know if what I saw was real or just some manifestation of our fear, but I swear it looked exactly like one of those cursed figures from horror movies, The Grudge, to be precise. Before I could react, Jill panicked. She screamed and somehow fell through the opening where the attic stairs had been, her body hitting it in a way that forced the staircase to shoot back up, leaving me trapped in the attic. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it would burst. I ripped the multi-tool from my hoodie pocket and started smashing at the stairs, desperate to get them down, to climb out, to get away from whatever was in the attic with me. The sound of crawling and dragging got closer, louder and sharper, like it was right on top of me. My mind was a mix of sheer terror and survival instinct. I could feel something, just barely touch me, and that made me panic even more. I slammed down with all my strength, the breaking part of the staircase mechanism. It finally gave way, sending me tumbling down and fracturing my wrist in the process. I landed hard, pain shooting up my arm. But it didn't matter. My first instinct was just to escape. I looked up. The thing was gone. Disappeared like it had never been there at all. I caught my breath and realized what had happened. I was lucky. Lucky Jill hadn't managed to open the stairs properly. Lucky I had managed to get out at all. But the memory of the gray-skinned girl growling, the feel of something so wrong in that attic, stayed with me long after. I still don't know if it was real, a hallucination, or just our teenage minds feeding off fear. All I know is that night left me shaken in a way nothing else has. By the time we finally regrouped with everyone else, it was chaotic. People were yelling, us arguing, and the normal bravado of teenagers trying to seem unafraid had completely evaporated. We left the house quickly, silent for the most part, each of us lost in our own thoughts, replaying what had happened. The walk back home was tense and quiet, the usual energy of the streets gone, replaced by that lingering, heavy dread. Even now, when I think about that night, the details come back vividly. The smell of the attic, the sharp glint of broken glass, the way the shadows shifted in the mirrors, and that sound, that impossible growl. It's one of those moments where every instinct screamed danger, and nothing in my teenage brain could make sense of it. Looking back, I can see why places like that attract people our age: curiosity, thrill-seeking, the idea of doing something dangerous and exciting. But there's a line, a boundary. Asta that night crossed it. It wasn't about fun or adventure anymore. It became a fight to survive, even if the enemy might have been some manifestation of fear itself. I still remember the pain in my wrist. But it's nothing compared to the psychological scar of feeling trapped in that tight, dark attic with something that shouldn't exist. Something watching and waiting. And Jill, well, she didn't make it any easier. Somehow her panic both endangered her and left me alone to face it. We never spoke about it again, and for months after, none of us wanted to even mention that house. Years later, I can't go near abandoned houses without thinking of that night. The images come back almost like a memory, but sharper, more real than any dream could feel. Even telling the story now, I can feel my heart rate spike, my stomach tighten. It's one of those experiences that refuses to leave, no matter how much time passes. And it has changed the way I see curiosity and danger. The thrill of the unknown doesn't always end with a story to tell. Sometimes it ends with something that you carry inside forever. That night, in that attic, I learned the kind of fear that stays with you. Not the fleeting kind you can shake off after a nightmare, but the deep, marrow-level kind. The kind that makes you question reality for a while. The kind that lingers in shadows long after the lights are turned back on. And even now, I can't fully explain it. Was it real? Was it our minds conjuring something out of panic? I don't know. But I know what I felt. And that feeling has never left me. Story 11. Growing up, my parents were divorced, and I always felt closer to my mom than to my dad. And it wasn't that I didn't care about my dad, but my mom and I had this bond that went deeper. I was always worried about her, even when I was a kid. I'd be at school, sitting in class or walking through the hallways, and my thoughts would drift to her. I'd wonder if she was okay, if she'd eaten, if she was driving safely, or if something had gone wrong. I was, and still am, a huge mama's boy. It wasn't just affection. It was worry that ran under the surface of everything I did. My mom worked as a nursing assistant at a local nursing home. She always worked the night shift, which meant she would leave the house late in the evening and get home in the early hours of the morning. I knew her schedule, but it didn't make it any less terrifying for me. I would always picture her driving through the dark, empty streets, tired from her long shift, and I would imagine the worst-case scenarios. When I was little, my mind would spiral into these horrifying thoughts. What if she got into a car accident and never made it home? What if she just disappeared one night, never coming back? The thought alone would make me anxious, and I'd often lie awake at night imagining it. Not too long ago, I had a dream that felt more real than any dream I've ever had. And the weirdest part was that it didn't feel like a dream in the normal sense. I wasn't in it, living it firsthand. I was observing it, like watching a movie unfold on a screen. I could see everything with perfect clarity, like someone had handed me a camera and I was capturing every detail. And the dream was about my mom. In the dream, she was driving home late at night, just like she does for work. I remember the streets perfectly. The way the yellow lines cut through the dark asphalt, the soft glow of streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement. Everything felt normal at first, calm even. But then, something caught my attention. A car was stopped on the side of the road. Smoke was curling up from under its hood, and there was a man standing beside it. He looked completely ordinary at first glance, wearing an army green jacket and a matching beanie. Nothing about him suggested danger, at least until he got into my mom's car. She stopped to let him in, and he slid into the passenger seat without a word. She kept her eyes on the road, completely focused, not paying attention to him at all. The way he looked, the casualness in his posture, should have seemed reassuring. But it wasn't. Something about his calmness made my stomach tighten. They drove for a while. I don't remember the details of their conversation. I think he was thanking her for helping him with something. But her eyes never left the road. She was completely oblivious to him, and that made what happened next even more terrifying. The man reached into a small backpack he had in his lap and pulled out a tool. At first, it seemed like a regular drill, but then I noticed it had a razor-sharp edge attached to it. The sound it made was a low mechanical drilling noise. He held it casually in his hand, just staring at my mom, like it was no big deal at all. There was no hesitation, no emotion, just an ordinary man holding a weapon that could kill. The sight of him in that moment, so calm, so normal, so terrifying, made my chest tighten and my throat go dry. My mom, as always, was focused on driving, completely unaware of the danger sitting right next to her. The contrast between her obliviousness and his deadly intent was horrifying. It made the scene feel unreal, yet terrifyingly possible. Then the dream cut to black. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would break through my chest. My sheets were twisted around me, and I could feel the lingering tension in my body, the fear that had been so real in the dream, that it didn't feel like a dream at all. For several minutes, I couldn't even move, just lying there, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that it wasn't real, that nothing had happened. Even after I got up, even after the initial fear faded slightly, the memory of it stayed with me. I couldn't shake the image of him sitting there in the passenger seat, holding that razor-edged drill, looking completely normal as if nothing was wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling of my mom being completely unaware of what was happening to her, her focus entirely elsewhere. That image haunted me. It was one of the most terrifying dreams I can remember, not because of supernatural elements or strange settings, but because it felt plausible. It felt like something that could happen in real life, which made the fear linger long after I woke up. I didn't even want to think about what might have happened if the dream had continued, if I hadn't woken up when I did. Since that dream, I found myself worrying about silence in a new way. I noticed sounds I didn't notice before. The quiet hum of a fan, the faint creak of the floorboards, the soft rush of air through a window. It's like my mind is always on alert, waiting for the impossible to become real. And even though I know my mom is safe, and that dream was just a dream, that night left a mark. The fear it inspired, the helplessness I felt watching her unaware, is something I will never forget. Story 12. When I think back to the old house I grew up in, I still get chills. It was one of those sprawling, aged homes that had been built in the 1920s and gradually added on to over the decades. There was a second story, an extra room in the back, and all the creaks and quirks you'd expect from a house that had been around for nearly a century. It wasn't a mansion by any means, but it had character, or, as I would later realize, a character of its own that we didn't fully understand. Two incidents happened there, both terrifying in their own way, and both left marks in my memory that never fully faded. The first one happened to me when I was home alone, waiting for my friends to pick me up. My mom, my brother, and my cousin were getting ready to go to the park that afternoon. By the time they left, the house felt unnaturally quiet. I had grown used to the sounds of footsteps, chatter, and the general hum of people moving through it. So when it went completely silent, it felt strange, almost oppressive. I was sitting in the dining room when I heard a sudden, loud thud from my brother's room upstairs. My first instinct was to check on him and my cousin. But then I remembered they weren't home. My stomach dropped. My heart started racing. I froze for a second, listening, trying to convince myself it was just the old house settling. But then I heard it again, the slow, deliberate creak of the stairs. My stomach twisted into knots. I knew that whatever it was moving toward me. I bolted quietly into the kitchen, adrenaline pumping, and grabbed the largest knife I could find. I stood there, my back pressed against the counter, staring at the doorway that led to the stairs. Each creak made me flinch. My breathing became rapid. My hands shook. I crouched down to make myself smaller, hoping, without really thinking, that hiding could protect me. Then came the sound of glass clinking, like plates being carefully moved together. Just when I thought I couldn't handle it anymore, I heard my friend honking from the driveway. Relief hit me like a wave. I sprinted from the kitchen, through the front hall, and out the door straight into his car. I collapsed into the passenger seat, my chest heaving as I tried to calm myself. He asked if I was okay, laughing lightly, and I explained what I had just heard. He shook his head and joked that if it were him, he would have gone upstairs to investigate. I told him, without a second thought, that I had no desire to die that day. When I finally returned home later, everything seemed normal. Nothing had been moved, nothing out of place, and the house was quiet in a way that felt almost too normal. I never told anyone else about what had happened that afternoon. Part of me felt ashamed of being scared, and part of me worried that no one would believe me. The second incident happened about a year earlier, but it involved my parents, and it terrified them even more than I had ever been. My brother and I were spending the weekend at a friend's house, so the house was just my parents that night. They had been up late, chatting and watching a television show, sitting in the living room. My dad was reclined in his chair, and my mom sat at the far end of the couch, closest to the stairs. They were talking about the pictures they had taken the day before, noting how most of the photos seemed to have strange orbs floating in them, something they couldn't explain. Then, out of nowhere, the end of the couch my mom was sitting on slowly lifted into the air. Just a few inches at first, but enough for her eyes to widen in shock. For a brief moment, she was suspended, floating above the ground, before the couch crashed back down with a loud bang that shook the house. The sound echoed through the walls, rattling frames and cupboards. My dad reacted immediately. He jumped to his feet and began yelling at the house like it was a living thing, screaming with all the fear and anger he could muster. "You will leave my family alone. Do not touch them. Do not hurt them. Do not show yourselves. You will leave them alone." He ran from room to room, screaming his heart out, the sound of his voice bouncing off the walls. My mom sat frozen in sheer terror, unable to move, her eyes wide as she tried to process what had just happened. After that night, the activity never escalated to physical objects moving again. But the orbs and shadows remained. They floated in the corners of rooms, shifted along the walls, or caught the light in ways that made it impossible to ignore. The house that had once felt like a home became a place of tension, where silence was never safe and shadows always seemed to linger a little too long. Looking back, I feel grateful that I no longer live there. The house carried its own history and perhaps its own memories, things left behind from decades past, things that were never meant to be disturbed. Both incidents, the time I was home alone and the night my parents' couch lifted, remain etched in my mind. They are reminders that sometimes the places we think are safe and familiar can hold secrets we can't explain. Even now, years later, thinking about that house still makes my skin crawl. It wasn't just the noises or the shadows. It was the way the house seemed to watch, to respond, to remind us that we weren't ever truly alone within its walls. Living there taught me to respect the unknown, to accept that not everything can be rationalized or explained. And that fear isn't always about danger. It's about the realization that some things in this world simply exist beyond our understanding. I still remember the sound of those stairs creaking, the clink of glass, the slow lift of the couch, and the pure terror in my parents' faces. That house shaped my understanding of fear, of vulnerability, and of the strange ways the world can show itself when we least expect it. And while I've moved on and live far away now, I'll never forget those moments, the ones that left me and my family questioning the boundaries between what's real and what isn't. Story 13. I'm not a superstitious person by any stretch of the imagination. Ghosts, curses, the usual horror stories, none of it has ever fazed me. I've always been logical, rational, and skeptical. But what happened last night made me question everything I thought I knew. I swear every word of this is true. It started with a nightmare. In my dream, I was walking along a familiar street in my city. The night felt ordinary, quiet except for the distant hum of cars on nearby roads. Then a stranger appeared, walking past me. He said something, but I couldn't catch it. I didn't understand what he was asking, so I took a step closer to try to hear him. That's when everything went wrong. As soon as I was within arm's reach, he stabbed me with a needle. A sharp, sudden sting, and I felt something enter my body that immediately made me weak, dizzy, and disoriented. My vision blurred, my limbs went heavy, and I fell into unconsciousness. When I came to, I wasn't in my street anymore. I was somewhere impossibly dark and horrifying, somewhere that felt like the exact opposite of life. I was in what I could only describe as a dungeon in hell. All around me, shadows moved. Supernatural creatures, demons, horrors that defied description. Their shapes were grotesque and shifting, as though they were made of smoke and fire at the same time. I was stretched out on a torture rack, my skin being flayed, my body racked with pain. The demons laughed as they worked, their voices echoing and cruel. "There is no escape," one of them hissed. "There is no escape." I screamed, tugged at the chains that bound me, tried desperately to pull myself free, but my strength was useless. Every movement I made only drew more cackling laughter. Panic and despair surged through me in a way I've never felt before. Time seemed endless in that dream, every second a torture I couldn't wake from, and every glance at the demons' faces reminded me of the inescapable nightmare I was trapped in. And then, ding-dong. I woke up instantly. My heart slammed in my chest. My body was drenched in sweat, and my hands shook so violently that I could barely sit up. My apartment was dark, quiet, and entirely normal. Or so I thought. The sound had come from my doorbell. Ding-dong. I froze. It was 5 in the morning, still pitch dark outside. My apartment building was usually silent at this hour, especially on a weekend. I live alone. Nobody was supposed to be there. My first thought was disbelief. Maybe it was a dream lingering into reality, some after effect of my nightmare. But the doorbell rang again. Ding-dong. Panic started to crawl up my spine. I grabbed my flashlight, its weight oddly comforting in my trembling hands, and then bolted to the front door. I peered through the large glass window, shining the light across the porch. There was no one there. Not a shadow, not a figure, nothing. The street beyond the building was deserted, slick from a thin drizzle that had started falling. Rain streaked the pavement, cold drops bouncing off the asphalt, adding to the eerie, empty stillness. I stood there for a few minutes, straining my ears for any sound, any sign of movement. Nothing. Maybe it was some malfunction with the doorbell, I thought, trying to rationalize it. Maybe a ghostly echo from the nightmare? The doorbell had only rung twice. Shrugging off the unease, I turned and walked back upstairs, trying to convince myself it was over. But then, as soon as I closed my apartment door behind me, it happened again. Ding-dong, ding-dong, ding-dong. 3 rings in rapid succession, loud and urgent, like someone was desperately demanding my attention. My stomach sank, my heart pounding faster than it had all night. I bolted back down the stairs, almost tripping over the steps in my haste. The porch was empty, silent, deserted. Cold rain slicked the steps, and the faint glow of the streetlights reflected off the puddles. But there was no one there. Nothing to explain the sound I had just heard. My hands were shaking so badly I had to clutch the railing for support. I looked around, my mind racing. Who or what could have rung the doorbell so insistently and disappeared before I got there? Nobody lives in the building with access to a back door. No one was supposed to be out this early. Every rational explanation collapsed under the weight of what I had experienced. I ran back upstairs, my breaths ragged, and as soon as I reached my apartment, I switched off the doorbell ringer completely. I couldn't listen to it anymore. I couldn't bear the idea of hearing that sound again, of being forced to check the door for some invisible presence. Sleep didn't come for hours after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear the faint echo of the doorbell in my mind, mingled with the shrill laughter of demons from my dream. My body tensed at the slightest creak of the apartment, the fridge humming, the faint drip of water from the bathroom, the wind brushing against the window panes. Every ordinary noise now felt threatening. Even now, writing this, I can feel the fear creeping back, just remembering it. It was a moment where reality and nightmare blurred, on where something as ordinary as a doorbell became a trigger for something terrifying. It wasn't supernatural. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But I know one thing. I have never felt so helpless and so afraid in my entire life. That night has changed the way I move through my apartment, the way I react to sounds, and the way I sleep. I am still not superstitious, but I know now that some things are better left unexplained. Story 14. I used to live near a graveyard. It wasn't one of those small, tucked-away plots. It was large, sprawling, with rows of old stones leaning slightly from years of neglect. The quiet there was something I couldn't find anywhere else. I liked to be alone, to walk among the gravestones, hear nothing but the wind brushing over the trees, the soft rustle of leaves, and the distant hum of the city beyond the fence. Now, there was a calmness to it, a sense of stillness that made the rest of the world feel miles away. Because of that, I often went there during the day, but eventually, curiosity and something darker led me to explore it at night. I've always had a fascination with the paranormal. I wouldn't call myself a believer, not fully, but I've never dismissed the possibility that something else exists, something just beyond our perception. One night, I decided I wanted to see if there was a spirit willing to communicate. I told a few of my friends about it. They shared my interest in the supernatural, yet they warned me. They told me it was a bad idea, that it wasn't safe, that I shouldn't go. Naturally, I ignored their warnings. Hindsight, as always, made it clear that listening to them would have been the smarter choice, and I left my house shortly before 3 a.m. The streets were quiet, the world around me sleeping, and the graveyard waited like a dark, inviting secret at the end of the road. When I arrived, the gate creaked slightly as I pushed it open. The shadows inside stretched long across the ground from the weak light of the moon. I wandered along the worn paths for a while, walking slowly, absorbing the cold, damp air, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness. Eventually, I reached my favorite spot, a small clearing surrounded by older, cracked gravestones, where the air felt colder, heavier, almost as if it had weight. I sat down there for a while, listening to the wind and letting the silence settle around me. When the clock ticked over to 3, I moved to the center of the graveyard. I took a deep breath and began to speak, softly at first. Simple questions, questions that any curious mind might ask if it wanted to reach out to the unseen. "Is anyone here that would like to speak?" I asked. "Why are you still here? Is there something keeping you?" I tried to sound calm, polite even, though my pulse was quickening. After a few minutes, I asked if anyone could give me a sign that they were present. I repeated my questions, patient, listening for any kind of reply. 10, maybe 15 minutes passed, and still nothing. The stillness felt heavier than before, almost pressing against me from all sides. I started feeling frustrated, a little silly even, talking to nothing. And then, in a moment of arrogance, I immediately regretted. I decided to try something different. I began to taunt, to provoke. I shouted insults at the invisible, mocking the spirits. I called them cowardly, weak, pointless. I laughed at my own daring. At first, there was nothing. Then it started, the laughter. It wasn't faint, it wasn't polite, and it certainly wasn't the nervous kind of laugh you hear in a horror movie for comic relief. It was low, guttural, echoing from somewhere ahead of me, slightly to the left. The kind of laughter that carries a promise of pain. The kind of laugh that could stop a person's heart if they heard it unexpectedly in the middle of the night. I froze. My pulse hammered in my chest, my skin prickled with goosebumps. I couldn't see anyone, yet the sound was so close, it felt like it was creeping around me, circling silently, ready to strike. It was a laugh that carried intent. I can't explain it exactly. There's no easy way to describe it. But it was the kind of laughter that makes you feel small, powerless, exposed. It wasn't playful. It wasn't silly. It was the laughter of something that enjoyed fear, that thrived on it. The laughter promised things I didn't want to imagine. It spoke of teeth, of blood, of slow, deliberate cruelty. I got up as quickly as I could, trying to remain calm, and began walking back the way I had come. My legs were stiff, my breath caught in my throat. By the time I reached the edge of the graveyard, near where the city lights began to spill faintly over the fence, I thought I was safe. I slowed down, letting the house in the distance guide me. telling myself it was over, that whatever had laughed at me had stayed in the graveyard. I tried to steady my breathing. Maybe it had just been my imagination. And then it happened again. The same laughter, coming from just over my shoulder. It was as if the creature, or whatever it was, had followed me, waiting until I thought I was safe before showing itself again. This time, there was no hesitation. I ran. My shoes slapped against the pavement, my chest burned, my hands shook. I didn't look back until I reached my door, slammed it shut and leaned against it, trying to convince myself it was gone. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I fell into a restless sleep. The next day, when my friends saw me, they didn't even need to ask. They looked at me and said, "You pissed something off, didn't you?" Their eyes were wide, their expressions a mix of awe and concern. Apparently, my fear had been obvious to anyone who knew me well enough to see it. I didn't tell them everything. Some things, you just can't. Weeks passed, and I tried to convince myself it was a one-time thing. But it wasn't. Some nights later, I was walking my dog along a small trail that led to a nearby hill, the same route I had taken countless times. The world was quiet, except for the sound of my dog's paws brushing against the dirt and the occasional wind rustling the grass. Then I heard it, the same deep, guttural laughter. It was coming from an empty hill. No one there, just the wind and the shadows. My dog froze, ears back, low growl in his throat. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they had turned to stone. The laughter didn't stop, circling me, taunting me, making my stomach twist. I have a feeling that whatever it was, it didn't just stay in that graveyard. There are moments, even now, like when I feel it near, a presence lingering in the corner of my vision, or that familiar, low, deliberate laughter echoing somewhere far off. I moved away from the state where this all happened, thinking distance would matter. But each time I came back, I felt it again, like a shadow following me silently, patiently, waiting. The laughter was too deep, too rough, to belong to a female. It was him. And somehow, I know that he hasn't forgotten. Even now, I avoid graveyards at night. I never mock the dead, never speak to the unseen unless I have to. The memory of that night is etched into me, a reminder that curiosity can have consequences, and that sometimes what you think is just a game can be terrifyingly real. I don't know if I'll ever understand what I encountered that night. All I know is that the laughter stays with me, a cruel, a mocking echo, reminding me that some things are better left alone. Story 15. I was a student back then, the kind of lazy, broke student who never has real food at home. My fridge was usually a bottle of water, maybe some ketchup, and half a lemon wrapped in cling film from 3 weeks ago. That week, I'd been home alone for about 6 days. My parents were away, the apartment was quiet, and I'd been living off instant noodles and whatever snacks I could find. By the 6th night, even I couldn't face another packet of noodles. It was a Tuesday, technically already early Wednesday, when my hunger finally pushed me out of the house. I checked the time. It was around 2 a.m. My stomach grumbled, and I thought, the McDonald's drive-in isn't that far. I can be there and back in, 20 minutes? In daylight, the area around that McDonald's is one of the busier parts of the city. It's a giant commercial zone made of several big halls and blocks, with hundreds of shops and places to eat tucked inside and around them. Clothing stores, electronics, cheap toy vendors, you name it. There's a cinema, a go-kart track, little bars, some nightclubs. On a weekend night, the whole place feels alive. Bright lights, music thumping from clubs, groups of people laughing and shouting, taxis weaving through. Normally, even late at night, it's at least moderately busy. People go clubbing, come out of the cinema, grab food. The streets are usually fully lit, a bit noisy, and you never really feel alone there. That night, it was different. As I turned off the main road and drove into the commercial area, the first thing I noticed was the darkness. And most of the streetlights were off. Not dimmed, off. Whole sections of what was usually bright pavement were just pools of shadow. Some store signs were still shining here and there, but all the big lights that usually make you feel like you're in the middle of a shopping festival were gone. It felt wrong, like walking into a mall after hours when everything is shut down and silent. I slowed the car slightly, more out of instinct than anything, and looked around. Empty parking spaces stretched out on both sides of me, row after row, the lines on the asphalt just barely visible in my headlights. Shops that were usually open late had their shutters down. The cinema building loomed in the background, a dark shape with only a small red exit sign glowing faintly by one side door. No people, no cars except mine, no buzzing neon. Just the hum of my engine and the soft, distant roar of the city far away. It struck me how unusual that was. A Tuesday night isn't the weekend, sure, but it's not like the world stops. Usually there are at least a few people stumbling out of somewhere, or workers taking out trash, or cleaning staff getting things ready for the next day. That night, nothing. It was as if someone had reached in and plucked all the people out of the scene. The McDonald's was on the far side of the complex. To get there, I had to drive through almost the entire area. I kept going, my headlights cutting a path through the dark like a narrow tunnel. The steering wheel felt slick under my palms. I told myself it was just because I was hungry and tired. The empty streets and dark buildings were weird, but not dangerous. Lots of cities turn lights off late at night to save power, right? I was halfway through the area when I saw him. At first, he was just a shape ahead of me in the road. Something darker than the darkness around it. I squinted, leaning closer to the wheel, trying to make out what it was. It wasn't moving like a car or a bike. It was too high off the ground, too narrow. Human, my brain finally decided. Person. He was either standing or walking right in the middle of the lane, not on the sidewalk where you'd expect a pedestrian to be. No reflective clothing, no flashlight, just a person-shaped shadow occupying my path. My headlights were on low beam at that point. I flicked them up to high. The road lit up in harsh white light. The figure in front of me snapped into focus. It was a man. He was wearing dark tracksuit pants and a dark jacket with a lighter sweater underneath. The contrast between the white of his sweater and the black of everything else made him look even more ghost-like at first glance. He was hard to see until you were almost on top of him with the lights bright. If I'd been driving any faster, I might have come too close before noticing him properly. He was moving toward me, but not with a normal walk. His steps were slow, dragging, uneven. He had that slouched, off-balance look, his shoulders hunched, his head slightly forward. It made me think of movie zombies, the way they sort of shuffle more than stride. His feet seemed to barely leave the ground. It was not the walk of someone just out for a casual late-night stroll. Then I saw the blood. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, and then my stomach lurched and my hands clenched on the steering wheel. There was a dark stain smeared all around his mouth, running from his lips down his chin and dripping onto the ground. In my headlights, it glistened in a way that told me it was fresh. With every slow step, more little drops fell to the asphalt. His left arm was across his stomach, pressed tightly against his midsection, His hand disappeared under his jacket, where a dark blotch had spread across the fabric. It was soaked into the material in a roughly circular shape, darker in the middle, feathering out at the edges, just like you imagine a stab or deep cut would look when the blood spread. He looked like someone out of a nightmare, a man who'd taken a knife to the gut and was now shambling around in the dark, leaving little pieces of himself behind him. I hit the brake, brought the car to a stop about a car length or two before him, and just sat there for a heartbeat, my brain scrambling. Everything happened very fast then, but inside my head, time slowed down. Part of me reacted with basic human concern. This guy is hurt. He's bleeding. He needs help. Another part of me, the more cautious, city-raised part, immediately warned. Be careful. This could be a setup. People fake injuries to get close to drivers. You've heard those stories of robberies and carjackings. Something about this whole scene felt wrong. I rolled the window down just a few centimeters, enough that I could talk and hear better. Not enough that someone could easily reach in. My car doors locked automatically a few meters after I started driving, so I knew they were locked. I checked the dashboard indicator to make sure. All locked. Good. I kept my car in first gear, foot on the clutch, ready to drive off if I had to. With my left hand, I held the wheel. My right hand hovered near my phone on the passenger seat, ready to dial emergency services if this turned out to be what it looked like on the surface. A badly injured man needing an ambulance. He kept walking toward my car. The light made his face look pale except where the blood was. His eyes were dark pits under his brows. I could see now that his clothes were dirty and damp, like he'd been outside for a while. His movements were slow but purposeful, like all his focus was on reaching me. He came up to the driver's side and leaned his weight on my car, putting a bloody hand against the window. The smear he left, that thick, wet handprint, he stood out starkly in the beam of my headlights. Then he spoke. "Come on, you'll drive to XYZ district," he said. His accent was heavy, not local. It twisted the words, but I understood them. His tone was not one of someone asking for help. It was flat, like an order, like he was telling me, not requesting. The place he named, XYZ, I'll call it, was a poor district on the other side of the city. The kind of place everyone knows about, but many people avoid unless they have a reason to go. High crime, low income, not somewhere you casually drive to at 2 a.m. with a bleeding stranger in your car. I was completely caught off guard by what he said. I had expected, "Help me," or "Call an ambulance," or even "Hospital," not "Drive me to the other side of town." For a moment, all I could do was stutter. What?" I said. And now my voice sounded small, even to my own ears. "I said drive to XYZ," he snapped back, louder this time, with an angry edge. That anger did something to me. Up to that second, I had been teetering between fear and sympathy. His blood, his shuffle, his wound, they made me feel bad for him. But the way he demanded, the way his voice changed from flat to sharp, felt wrong. If you're badly hurt, you usually say, "Please," not bark orders at strangers. Something deep in me, some half-buried instinct, finally kicked in and took over. Every part of me screamed at once, "This is bad. This is not safe. Leave." I let the clutch out and pressed the gas. The car jerked forward. His hand slid off the window, leaving that big bloody smear behind. I veered a bit around him, on eyes flicking to the side to make sure I didn't hit him, but also that he wasn't trying to grab onto anything. I heard him shout something, but I didn't catch the words. Adrenaline was too loud in my ears. I drove. I didn't floor it like a maniac. but I accelerated out of there faster than I'd ever left a parking lot. My heart pounded against my ribs. My hands shook on the steering wheel. The road ahead seemed to stretch forever, and I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him running after me, or another car suddenly appearing, blocking the way. Nothing. Just the empty, dark shopping complex in the mirror. I didn't calm down when I reached the McDonald's parking lot. My hands were still trembling so badly that shifting gears felt clumsy. I pulled into a spot and put the car in neutral, exhaling in a burst, and only then realizing how little I'd been breathing. Then I looked at the side window. The bloody handprint was still there. A dark, sticky outline of his fingers and palm, streaked where it had slipped, speckled with tiny droplets. The sight of it made my stomach flip. In that moment, that blood wasn't just a sign of his injury. It was a physical mark of what had just happened. A reminder that for a few seconds, he'd been right next to me, close enough to touch. My brain was still all over the place. Part of me was thinking, you should call the police. Another part of me was thinking, what if he really was hurt and you just left him? And yet another part was louder than both. Get this off your car. I grabbed some wet paper towels from the glove compartment. I always kept a pack in there for spilled drinks or fast food messes. I got out, the cool air hitting my hot face, and started wiping at the blood. It didn't come off easily. It smeared first, making a bigger red blur before gradually fading. I wiped and wiped, my hands shaking, my mind replaying his voice, his words. All the while, the parking lot was almost completely quiet. The McDonald's building glowed with warm light, a little bubble of normal life just a few meters away. But out here by my car, it still felt like a different world. As I wiped the door, I saw smaller specks of blood along the lower part of the car, where he must have brushed against it, or where drops had splashed as he stood there. I cleaned those too, working methodically, probably looking insane to anyone who might have been watching, obsessively scrubbing every last trace off. When I finally finished, as the side of my car was damp but clean, no visible red. My hands smelled like metal and chemicals. I stood there for a second, paper towels bunched in my fist, breathing hard. I thought about calling the police again. Logically, it seemed like the right thing to do. A man, possibly stabbed, staggering around a dark commercial area at 2 a.m. Even if there was something shady about it, he obviously needed help. Or at least someone should know what was going on. But then, all the reasons not to call crowded in. Where I live, dealing with the police is not simple. Anonymous calls aren't truly anonymous. People get dragged into things, have to give statements, sometimes get treated like suspects themselves. Especially if your story is, well, this injured guy tried to get in my car and I drove away. I imagine trying to explain it. Yes, officer, he was bleeding. No, I didn't take him to the hospital. He wanted me to drive him to XYZ instead. Yes, that neighborhood. No, I don't know why. Yes, I left him there alone. Every version of the conversation I played out in my head ended badly, either with me in trouble or with the whole thing being dismissed as not our problem. Maybe that's not fair. Maybe something good would have come of a call. But in that moment, standing there with the last of his blood on paper crumpled in my hand, I chose not to. Instead, I threw the towels in a nearby trash can, wiped my hands on my jeans, and went through the drive-through lane like I had originally planned. It felt surreal. Bright menu screens displayed burgers and fries. Cheerful pictures of milkshakes and kids' meals smiled at me. A crackly speaker shouted, "What can I get you?" I placed my order in a voice that sounded distant in my own ears, like someone else was speaking for me. I pulled forward to the waiting area, that small stretch of asphalt near the side where they have you park if your order isn't quite ready. I put the car in park, leaned back, and let out a long, shaky breath. That's when I saw a figure again. A few dozen meters ahead, near the main road by the bus stop, someone was moving slowly along the sidewalk. Even from that distance, in the patchy light from the street lamps that still worked in that section, I could tell from the posture, the way of walking, that it was the same man. He was still shambling, still bent slightly over, still holding his arm near his stomach. From where I sat, I couldn't see his face clearly this time, but I didn't need to. My body recognized him before my mind did. Every muscle went tense again. He made his way to the bus stop and stood there, or maybe leaned against the glass of the shelter. Time stretched. I watched him, unable to look away, heart pounding again. 5 minutes is not a long time on paper. In that parking spot, watching that figure at the bus stop, it felt like an hour. I kept going over the same thoughts. Should I call someone now? Should I go over and say something? Should I just drive home and pretend this never happened? Every option felt bad in a different way. Then, finally, a pair of headlights turned into the area near the bus stop. A taxi pulled up. It slowed in front of him, the interior light flicking on for a moment. I saw him move, Nick open the back door and get inside. The cab drove off, tail lights disappearing into the distance. I sat there, watching the empty bus stop for a second after they left. The McDonald's worker came to the car window and handed me my bag of food. I thanked them automatically. Then I drove home. The whole way back, my mind ping-ponged between feelings. Guilt for leaving him. Fear about what might have happened if I'd let him in the car. Anger that I'd been put in that situation in the first place. And a deep, unsettling confusion. Maybe he really had been hurt and just wanted to get to someone he knew in that other district. Maybe he didn't trust hospitals or the police. Maybe there was some emergency there I knew nothing about. Or maybe it was something else. Maybe he'd been drunk or high. Maybe he was part of some plan that I'd accidentally dodged by driving away. I'll never know. All I know is that at 2 a.m, in a part of the city that was usually full of light and people, I met a half-bleeding stranger who leaned on my car, ordered me to drive him to one of the roughest parts of town, and left his bloody handprint as a reminder that sometimes, for a few seconds, you end up in the wrong place at the wrong time with no clear-cut right answer. To this day, the memory of his face in my headlights and that handprint on my window still makes me uneasy. Before you go, after all these real incidents, do you think these were warnings, coincidences, or something that follows people? And which theme should I do next? Wilderness encounters, home hauntings, or stranger danger true stories? If you want more long-form real horror like this, like and subscribe, and tell me which story you want a part 2 on.